Hello, Secretary Panetta. Thank you so much for joining us today in this ASP chat.
Good to be with you.
So, Secretary Panetta, for the few that may not be aware of the many positions that you've held in government throughout your career, you were a former CIA director. You served in the Army, in the U.S. House of Representatives, as the director of the Office of Management and Budget, as a chief of staff to President Bill Clinton, and you were the Secretary of Defense during some of the most critical years negotiating the Iran nuclear deal. So with that in mind, let's start with your perspective about weapons proliferation issues happening across the globe today. China recently tested a hypersonic weapon that can travel at 5 times the speed of sound. We hear a lot about hypersonic missiles being impressive for its speed, but there's other missiles out there, like ICBMs, that can reach similar speeds. So first off, tell us what exactly is a hypersonic missile and why is it so special? How is it different from other missile technologies out there today that exist?
Well, you defined it at the very beginning by saying that it's a missile that can travel at 5 times the speed of sound. And that capability to fly that fast makes it not only move very quickly and avoid the ability to take that missile down because it is moving so fast, but it can change direction very quickly as well. And essentially, the greatest danger here is that at this point in time, I'm not sure we have very effective counter missile capabilities to deal with a supersonic missile as we understand China is testing. Now, we're involved in hypersonic missiles as well. We're trying to develop them. We're trying to develop the capability to have a missile that can be effective as a defense. But I have to tell you, at this point in time, their ability to have a hypersonic missile and our lack of an adequate defense makes this what General Milley called a Sputnik moment.
Is it the changing of direction that makes it so unique that ICBMs cannot do?
Yeah, this thing can bounce on the atmosphere. It goes up in a large trajectory, but because it's moving so fast, it can change directions very quickly. And it's hard to track a missile that keeps changing directions in a rapid pace. 5 times the speed of sound makes it an extremely fast and capable missile. That's dangerous.
Well, as you said, General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, called China's missile test close to a Sputnik moment. Now, a large portion of our audience is younger and they may not have even been alive during the Sputnik crisis. Can you start by explaining the significance of Sputnik, and do you agree with General Milley's characterization?
Well, it's not bad. I was alive when Sputnik happened. I think I was a young boy, and it was a frightening moment because it appeared that the Russians were ahead of us in terms of the race for space because they'd been able to put a satellite in space with the Sputnik. And the fact that Russia had that capability and we were still working to try to develop a space capability at that point made it clear, especially in the middle of the Cold War against the Soviet Union, that they clearly had an advantage. So there's no question the same elements are involved here. China has developed, or appears to have developed, a hypersonic capability with a missile. We're still working on it. Their ability to have something like that, depending on how far along they are, could represent a very offensive capability on their part that we may not be able to deal with. So, yeah, it means that we've got some work ahead of us. Now, like Sputnik, that basically drove the United States to really be aggressive in terms of its space program. President Kennedy, made clear that we were going to move quickly to get in space, and we did, and we ultimately got ahead of the Russians as a result of that. So this could be an opportunity to really move quickly in the whole hypersonic area, to be able to develop the capability not only to have a hypersonic missile, but to also have the capability to take one down.
In September, North Korea claimed to have successfully tested a hypersonic missile. So what do we know about North Korea's weapons development program, and where does our relationship stand with them under the Biden administration?
Well, this is a challenging time right now in terms of nuclear capabilities. A lot of countries have developed nuclear capabilities, and clearly North Korea is one of those. The last intelligence I saw indicated that they had something like 28 weapons, but they've also made clear that they're continuing to add to their nuclear arsenal. As a result of that, I don't know that we can say right now just how many nuclear weapons they have, but it's a substantial number. And then if you combine that with what North Korea has been doing on missile capability, which is largely to develop ICBMs, and also mobile missiles that can be launched from trucks, so that makes it much more difficult to know when those missiles are being launched. And they've also developed, evidently, a submarine launching capability as well. So when you combine the fact that they have nuclear weapons, combined with that missile capability, they represent a real threat, not only to their region, but to the United States of America.
Iran recently announced a willingness to return to talks regarding the Iran nuclear deal. What's the likelihood the Biden administration will be able to reach a new Iran nuclear deal agreement?
It's going to be a tough challenge. Iran has elected a much more hardline government. The intelligence we're picking up now is that Iran has been moving ahead with enriching nuclear fuel as a result of the United States walking away from that agreement. They went into enriching nuclear fuel. There's evidence now that they're buying additional equipment to be able to further enrich, which will bring them closer to the possibility of developing a nuclear weapon. So with Iran doing that, having a hardline administration, and although the United States, I think, will work with our allies to see whether or not they're willing to come back within the confines of the nuclear agreement, I think although they've agreed to return to the table and have that discussion, I think it's going to be very difficult to get Iran within the limits of the nuclear agreement again. I think it's going to take some long and difficult negotiating in order to try to see whether they're willing to abide by any restraints.
Recent reports have cited Russia and China's growing cyber warfare capabilities and an increased willingness to use them. How does the development of new missile technologies compare with other threats, like cyber warfare facing the United States?
Well, we're in the 21st century, and it's the age of technological development across the board. China's investing in artificial intelligence capabilities. They're investing in quantum. They're investing in robotics. They're investing in cyber. The United States is trying to do the same. And so we're living at a period of time where countries using technologies, new technologies, are not only moving forward with new weapon systems, as we saw with the hypersonic missile, but they're also expanding their nuclear capability as well. I think this is a dangerous time. There used to be a willingness to try to limit nuclear development. We had a nuclear treaty that required some limitations on the development of nuclear warheads. We don't have that kind of agreement on cyber. We don't have that kind of agreement on hypersonic missiles. We don't have that kind of agreement with regards to some of the sophisticated weapon systems that are now being deployed in space. So it tells me that this is a dangerous moment for the world.
Are there any international laws or agreements that prevent certain types of weapons development? And how can we rein in nuclear proliferation?
Well, aside from the nuclear treaty, in which there are some limited number of countries that have agreed to limitations on nuclear development, and aside from chemical warfare, where there are international agreements to try to restrain the use of chemical warfare, although we saw that being used in Syria recently, I have to tell you that there are not a lot of limitations in terms of what countries can develop at the present time. And cyber is probably the best example of that. Cyber is, I believe, the battlefield of the future. You don't have to deploy a fighter plane or a bomber or boots on the ground. You can sit at a computer and basically deploy a very sophisticated virus that can go after our infrastructure, for example, and paralyze our chemical systems, our transportation systems, our fuel. We saw a cyber attack on our fuel line recently with a ransomware attack on the United States, the Colonial ransomware attack. We are living at a time when cyber can truly paralyze a nation. And, you know, I worry about whether or not we have adequate defenses to deal with that kind of threat. And more importantly, do we have the offensive capability to try to make clear to countries like Russia and others that might use cyber against us that if they're going to do it, they're going to pay a price. So cyber, I think, is one of the more dangerous areas right now in terms of the capabilities that our adversaries have, the United States, and whether or not we have the ability to really have a coordinated policy to really defend against a cyber attack. I can tell you right now, as we speak, that there is a ransomware attack every 11 seconds going on. Every 11 seconds, we're experiencing a ransomware attack against the private sector and against other targets. This too is a dangerous moment when it comes to cyber.
Last week, the New York Times reported on a previously undisclosed 2019 airstrike in Syria that killed potentially dozens of innocent civilians. And in August, 10 civilians were killed in an airstrike in Afghanistan. What steps does the U.S. military take to try to limit these kinds of civilian casualties, and what kind of accountability is there when they happen?
You know, this is something that I think the United States Department of Defense are going to have to take a very close look at to try to determine the approach we take when we do a strike. I have to tell you, as CIA director, I had some responsibility for drone strikes. But we made sure that we had very good intelligence on the ground with regards to those targets. We made sure that we did surveillance over those targets in order to ensure that if we were going to do a strike, it would go after the target and not result in any kind of collateral damage. That takes a lot of work, takes a lot of care, takes a lot of competence to be able to do that. I think the military has to develop that same kind of competence when it comes to strikes. When you're in war, I understand. You know, you're fighting. This one strike took place in ISIS. It was kind of a crazy situation, and I'm sure those troops called in a strike because they thought they were dealing with the enemy. But when that happens, there has to be a way to be able to confirm that you have an accurate strike that you're about to launch, that you have the targets that involve our adversaries, and that you're going to minimize collateral damage. I think there were 80 individuals that were killed in this strike. That's a lot of collateral damage. So I hope the Pentagon does investigate this situation, and as a result of it, develop better capabilities when it comes to deciding when to strike.
With all the domestic issues happening in the U.S. right now, why should Americans care about weapons developments by foreign nations?
America, for that matter, countries throughout the world, the greatest concern we have is security. Security of our families, security of our jobs, security in terms of being able to take care of the needs of our families, etc. But that also involves being able to secure our families and keep them safe. We went through an attack on 9/11 where terrorists attacked our country and killed close to 3,000 people, innocent people. And as a result of that, we went to war against terrorism. Why? Because we felt we had a responsibility to protect our people and make sure that another 9/11 attack would never happen again. These weapons that are being developed today, the adversaries that we have in the world, whether it's Russia or China or North Korea or Iran or terrorists, represent a threat to our lives and to our security. And that's why it's very important for the United States to take a leadership position, working with our allies. We've got a lot of flashpoints in the world. The United States can't do this alone. We have got to work with our allies to make clear to our adversaries that we have an effective deterrence that will make them pay a price if they try in any way to attack our security. That's the message the United States and our allies have to be able to send in order to ensure that those families we care about remain secure. So that's why people need to worry about this.
Secretary Panetta, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you joining us on this ASP chat.
It's good to be with you guys.
Thank you so much, sir. Take care.